Hey, cuz, my landlord is being a total ass about the lease renewal. Can you look over these documents tonight? Need it by tomorrow morning. Bex. I stared at my phone, the familiar weight settling in my chest as I glanced at the clock. 11:37 p.m. 3 hours passed when I'd promised myself I'd be in bed, preparing for tomorrow's presentation, the one that could finally get me the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years at Meridian Insurance in Rockford, Illinois. My cousin Derek's text glowed accusingly on the screen. The same cousin who'd forgotten my birthday 3 years running. The same cousin who'd promised to help me move last spring, then claimed a hangover and ghosted me the morning of. I took a deep breath and typed, "I've got a big presentation tomorrow. Can I look at it this weekend instead?" 3 dots appeared immediately. "Seriously, Ellie? It's just some paperwork. You're good with that stuff. I need it now." My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the familiar guilt creeping in. I was good at that stuff. At 32, I'd built a respectable career as a risk analyst, paid off my student loans, and managed to buy a modest 2-bedroom house in Loves Park, just outside Rockford. Meanwhile, Derek bounced between jobs and apartments, leaving a trail of emergencies that inevitably became my problem. It wasn't just Derek. There was Aunt Maggie with her constant computer crises, Uncle Pete, who needed rides to doctor's appointments despite having a perfectly functional car, and my sister Jen, who required babysitting at the last minute because her plans came up suddenly. None of them ever seemed to remember that I had my own life, my own needs. I glanced at my dining room table, covered with presentation materials I'd been organizing. My laptop displayed slides I'd been tweaking for hours. I'd barely eaten dinner, a sad microwave meal consumed while finalizing the quarterly risk assessment numbers. "I really can't tonight, Derek. I'll help you Saturday." The response came instantly. "Whatever." "Forget I asked. Nice to know how much family means to you." I set my phone down, trying to ignore the hot sting behind my eyes. Why did I feel guilty? Why was I the unreasonable one for not dropping everything at midnight? My phone buzzed again. "Mom said you'd probably be too busy for family. Guess she was right." Aunt Patricia. Of course Derek had already called his mother. Patricia, my mother's sister, had practically raised me after Mom died from cancer when I was 12. Dad tried his best, but working 2 jobs left little time for a grieving preteen. Patricia had stepped in, and she never let me forget it. I closed my eyes, remembering the countless times I'd rearranged my life to accommodate my relatives. The work deadlines I'd barely met because I was helping Jen move. The vacation days spent driving Uncle Pete to specialists in Chicago. The weekends sacrificed to fix Aunt Maggie's virus-infected computer. The money lent that was never repaid. What had I gotten in return? When I'd had pneumonia last winter, not one of them had checked on me. When I'd needed help painting my new house, they were all mysteriously busy. When I'd been laid off 3 years ago and struggled for 6 months, none of them had offered assistance, financial or otherwise. Family helps family, they said, but apparently that only worked in one direction. I pushed away from my desk, suddenly too tired to continue working. Tomorrow's presentation would have to be good enough as it was. I'd send Derek a text in the morning, explaining again that I'd help on Saturday. He wouldn't be happy, but for once, that wasn't going to be my problem. Little did I know that this small act of self-preservation would set off a chain reaction that would forever change my relationship with my family. My presentation went well enough the next morning, despite my lack of sleep and preparation. My boss, Sarah, seemed impressed with the risk assessment model I developed, and I caught the regional director nodding along to my recommendations. It wasn't the home run I'd hoped for, but it was solid. I was gathering my materials when my phone buzzed. 3 texts from Derek, 5 from Aunt Patricia, and 1 from Jen. I ignored them all and headed back to my office. I'd barely sat down when my desk phone rang. Eleanor Michaels speaking. "Ellie? It's Aunt Patricia. Why aren't you answering your phone? Derek is in trouble with his landlord and you're ignoring him?" I closed my eyes, counting to 5 silently. "I'm at work, Aunt Patricia. I had an important presentation this morning. I told Derek I'd help him on Saturday." "Saturday? His landlord is threatening to evict him today. You know how to talk to these people. You have a professional job. They'll listen to you." The implication being that Derek, with his string of service industry jobs, couldn't advocate for himself. Or wouldn't. I can't leave work right now. I have meetings all afternoon. So you're just going to let him get evicted? After all we've done for you? There it was, the familiar refrain. After all we've done for you. As if I'd been nothing but a burden my entire life. I'll call him during my lunch break, I conceded, hating myself for it. But I can't leave the office. I suppose that's better than nothing, Patricia huffed. Family is supposed to be there for each other, Ellie. Your mother would be disappointed. The low blow landed as intended. My mother, Patricia's sister, had been the most selfless person I'd ever known. Would she be disappointed in me for not dropping everything to rescue Derek from yet another self-created crisis? I'll call him at lunch, I repeated, then hung up before she could say anything else. I sat at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what would happen if I simply stopped. Stopped answering their calls. Stopped dropping everything when they needed me. Stopped being the family fixer. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. My phone buzzed again. Jen this time. Mom said you're refusing to help Derek. WTF, Ellie? Family helps family. I started to type a defensive response, then stopped. This was the same sister who'd forgotten to pick me up from an outpatient procedure last year, leaving me to call a rideshare while still groggy from anesthesia. A new thought formed, surprising in its clarity. What if the problem wasn't that I was a bad family member, but that I was the only one who took that responsibility seriously? Instead of responding to Jen, I opened a new document on my computer and titled it Family Ledger. With methodical precision, I began documenting every favor, every emergency, every time I dropped everything to help a family member over the past year. Next to each entry, I noted what I'd given up to provide that help. Then, in a third column, I listed what each person had done for me during the same period. The imbalance was staggering. By the time my lunch break arrived, I documented over 40 instances where I'd provided significant help to family members in the past year alone. In return, I counted exactly 3 times when someone had done something for me, all minor favors that had cost them little effort or time. I picked up my phone and called Derek. Finally, he answered. You need to talk to my landlord. He's being totally unreasonable. What's the actual problem, Derek? I asked, keeping my voice even. I'm like 2 weeks late on rent, and he's threatening eviction. It's complete bullshit. You need to tell him he can't do that. Actually, he can. What does your lease say about late payments? How should I know? That's why I need you to look at it. You're good at that legal stuff. I took a deep breath. Have you paid your rent now? A pause. Not yet. I'm waiting for my next paycheck. So you want me to convince your landlord to not evict you for not paying rent that you still can't pay? Don't be like that, Ellie. I just need a little more time. If you talk to him, Derek, I can't fix this for you. You need to talk to your landlord, explain the situation, and work out a payment plan. I don't believe this, Derek's voice rose. The one time, I ask you for help. The one time? I interrupted, surprising both of us. Derek, I've helped you with paperwork, applications, and landlord issues at least 7 times in the past year alone. Whatever, he scoffed. You just don't want to help. You think you're so much better than the rest of us with your fancy job and your house. Well, guess what? Nobody likes a selfish bitch, Ellie. The words hit like a physical blow, but surprisingly, they didn't hurt as much as I expected. Instead, they clarified something I'd been struggling to articulate. This wasn't love. This wasn't family. This was exploitation. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said quietly. I can't help you today. I have to get back to work. I hung up before he could respond, then turned off my phone completely. For the first time in years, I finished a workday without a single family interruption. It felt strange, freeing, and a little bit terrifying. By Saturday, my phone had accumulated 37 missed calls and 62 text messages. Most were from Aunt Patricia, Derek, and Jen, but a few were from more distant relatives who'd apparently been recruited to join the guilt campaign. I'd spent Thursday and Friday evenings adding to my family ledger, going back further and documenting years of one-sided assistance. The pattern was clearer than ever. I gave, they took, and the one time I set a boundary, I became the villain. When my doorbell rang Saturday morning, I wasn't surprised to see Aunt Patricia on my porch, arms crossed, lips pursed in disapproval. "You've been avoiding us," she said as I opened the door. "I've been working," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. "Come in." She entered my living room, glancing around with the faint disdain she always showed for my modest home, as if I should have somehow afforded something grander on my salary while still serving as the family ATM and unpaid assistant. "Derek got evicted," she announced, settling onto my couch without being invited. "He's staying with me now." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I genuinely was. Not sorry enough to have prevented it by enabling him yet again, but sorry that he was facing the natural consequences of his actions. "You could have prevented it," Patricia stated, echoing my thoughts. "One phone call, Ellie. That's all it would have taken." I sat in the armchair across from her. "No, Aunt Patricia. What would have prevented it was Derek paying his rent on time, or Derek talking to his landlord himself, or Derek finding a cheaper apartment. There were many solutions that didn't involve me." Patricia's eyes widened. "I don't like your attitude, after everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me recently?" I asked quietly. "Excuse me? I'm genuinely asking. What has anyone in this family done for me in the past year? The past 5 years?" Patricia sputtered. "We're your family. We've always been there for you. I practically raised you after your mother died." "Yes, you helped me when I was a child, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm 32 now, Aunt Patricia. I've been taking care of myself and everyone else in this family for years." "So that's it? You got what you needed, and now you're too good for us? Your mother would be ashamed." The familiar pang hit, but this time I pushed past it. I don't think she would. Mom believed in helping others, yes, but she also taught me to respect myself, to not let people take advantage of me. "Take advantage?" Patricia's voice rose. "How dare you? After all the sacrifices we've made." "What sacrifices exactly?" I kept my voice calm. "In the past year, I've helped Derek with housing issues 7 times. I've driven Uncle Pete to 15 medical appointments. I've fixed Aunt Maggie's computer 12 times. I've babysat Jen's kids on 26 separate occasions. I've lent family members over $3,000 that was never repaid." Patricia stared at me, momentarily silenced. "In that same time," I continued, "not one of you checked on me when I had pneumonia. No one helped when I moved. When I lost my job 3 years ago, no one offered assistance. When I needed a ride home from surgery, Jen forgot to pick me up." "We've been busy," Patricia said weakly. "We have our own lives." "So do I replied simply. "That's my point." Patricia's expression hardened. "I see. So you're keeping score now?" "No, I'm recognizing a pattern, and I'm changing it." "What does that mean?" I took a deep breath. "It means I'm still happy to help when I can, but not at my own expense. Not anymore." Patricia stood, her face flushed with anger. "Well, I never thought I'd see the day when you turn your back on family. Your mother would be heartbroken." The accusation stung, but I held firm. "I'm not turning my back on anyone. I'm just asking for the relationship to be reciprocal. Family isn't about keeping score, Eleanor." "It's not about exploitation either," I replied quietly. Patricia grabbed her purse. "I don't recognize you anymore. The whole family is talking about how you've changed, how selfish you've become." "I have changed," I acknowledged. "I'm finally recognizing my own worth." She stormed to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "Don't come crying to us when you need something." The irony of her statement was so perfect I almost laughed. When had I ever gone to them when I needed something? After she left, I sat in the quiet of my living room, expecting to feel guilty or sad. Instead, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. For the first time in years, I didn't owe anyone anything. My time was my own. I glanced at my phone, buzzing with new text messages, likely Patricia rallying the family troops against me. I turned it off and picked up the book I'd been trying to finish for months. Today, I'd read. Tomorrow, who knew? The possibilities were endless. The family Cold War lasted 3 months. I received angry texts, voicemails, and even a few handwritten letters from older relatives who'd been told who knows what about my betrayal. I responded politely but firmly to each, explaining that I was still available to help when I could, but not at the expense of my own well-being. Most took this as further evidence of my selfishness. A few, to my surprise, seemed to understand. The most unexpected ally was my cousin Mark, Patricia's other nephew who'd moved to Seattle years ago. He called me out of the blue one evening. "So I hear you've been excommunicated from the family," he said when I answered. I laughed despite myself. "News travels fast. Aunt Patricia called to warn me about your disturbing behavior in case you tried to contact me." His tone made it clear what he thought of that assessment. I figured there was more to the story. I gave him the abbreviated version. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You know why I moved 3,000 miles away, right?" he finally asked. "Better job opportunities?" I suggested. That was the excuse. The real reason was I couldn't set boundaries while living in the same town. The only way I could have a life was to physically remove myself. The revelation hit me hard. Mark had always been the family success story. Brilliant software engineer, beautiful home in Seattle, picture-perfect family. I'd envied his escape without understanding it was exactly that, an escape. "How do you handle the guilt?" I asked. "Time and distance help," he admitted. "And therapy. Lots of therapy." We talked for over an hour. Mark shared his own experiences with our family's dynamics, confirming patterns I'd observed but sometimes doubted. Was I really seeing things clearly, or was I just being selfish? According to Mark, my only mistake had been waiting so long to set boundaries. "Wait until the first family emergency," he warned before we hung up. "That's when the real pressure will start." He was right. The call came on a Tuesday evening in November. Aunt Maggie had fallen and broken her hip. She needed surgery and would require significant care afterward. "She's asking for you," Jen said, her voice notably warmer than it had been during our limited interactions over the past months. "You were always her favorite." The implication was clear. All would be forgiven if I stepped up now. I could be welcomed back into the family fold as long as I was willing to become the primary caretaker for an elderly woman with a long recovery ahead. "I'll visit her in the hospital tomorrow," I promised, "and I'm happy to help with some of her care. But I can't be the only one. We'll need to work out a schedule where everyone pitches in." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Jen? Are you still there?" "I have kids, Ellie. I can't be running over there all the time." "I understand, but I have a full-time job in my own life. I can help, but not exclusively." "Unbelievable," Jen muttered. "You really have changed." "Yes," I agreed. "I have." The next day, I visited Aunt Maggie in the hospital, bringing flowers and a card. She seemed genuinely happy to see me, clasping my hand and telling me how much she'd missed me. "The family's not the same without you, Ellie girl," she said, using her old nickname for me. "I've missed you too," I said, and meant it. Beneath the complicated family dynamics, there was still love. After chatting for a while, I brought up the matter of her post-hospital care. "I've been thinking about how we can make this work," I said. "I can come by 3 evenings a week and Sunday afternoons. I thought maybe Jen could take Mondays and Wednesdays, Patricia could handle Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we could ask Uncle Pete for Saturdays." Aunt Maggie looked confused. "But Patricia said you'd be staying with me, that you'd offered." I blinked in surprise. "I never said that, Aunt Maggie. I have a full-time job. I can't be there 24/7. "Oh," her face fell. I must have misunderstood. But she hadn't misunderstood. Patricia had lied, assuming I'd cave under pressure once I saw Aunt Maggie's condition. It was manipulative and unfair to both Maggie and me. As I left the hospital, I called a family meeting at my house for the following evening. To my surprise, everyone actually showed up. Patricia, Jen, Derek, Uncle Pete, and a few other relatives who lived nearby. I'd prepared for this, setting up my dining room with a whiteboard, displaying a care schedule for Aunt Maggie, with every family member's name assigned to specific days and tasks. "Thank you all for coming," I began once everyone was seated. "I know we've had our differences lately, but Aunt Maggie needs us, and I think this is an opportunity for us to work together in a healthier way." Patricia's eyes narrowed at the word healthier, but she remained silent. I explained the schedule I'd created, making sure to distribute the responsibility fairly based on everyone's work and family situations. When I finished, the room was quiet. "So you're not going to take care of her full-time?" Derek finally asked. "No," I said firmly. "And it's unfair to expect that of any one person. We're a family. We should all contribute." "You always helped before," Jen pointed out. "Yes, and that wasn't healthy, for me or for all of you." I met each person's eyes as I spoke. I burnt myself out trying to be everything for everyone, and in the process, I enabled patterns that weren't good for anyone. "Here we go with the psychobabble," Patricia muttered. I ignored her. "I love Aunt Maggie, and I want to help her recover, but I won't be the only one helping this time." What followed was a heated discussion that laid bare all the family dynamics I'd been documenting for months. Patricia insisted I was being selfish. Jen complained that her kids took up too much time for her to help. Uncle Pete claimed his health problems prevented him from assisting. Derek simply stated he wasn't good at that kind of thing. I listened to it all, then pointed to the whiteboard. "This schedule stands," I said when they'd exhausted their excuses. "I'll be there during my assigned times. If the rest of you choose not to show up during yours, that's between you and Aunt Maggie." "You can't force us to follow your schedule," Patricia snapped. "You're right, I can't. But I also won't be filling in the gaps anymore." I stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Aunt Maggie deserves better from all of us. I hope you'll think about that. As they filed out, their expressions ranged from angry to thoughtful. Uncle Pete lingered behind. "You know," he said quietly, "your mother was the only one who ever stood up to Patricia. She'd be proud to see you doing the same." The unexpected validation brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you for saying that." He patted my shoulder awkwardly. "For what it's worth, I'll be there on Saturdays. You're right. We all need to do our part." The weeks that followed were transformative. To my surprise, most of the family actually showed up for their assigned care shifts with Aunt Maggie. Perhaps they realized I was serious about not picking up the slack, or maybe they just needed someone to organize the effort. Either way, Aunt Maggie received better care than she would have if I tried to do it all myself. Patricia remained cold, but even she fulfilled her obligations to her sister. Jen discovered that her children actually enjoyed visiting their great aunt and started bringing them along, turning her shifts into family time. Derek, to everyone's shock, revealed a previously hidden talent for making Aunt Maggie laugh, brightening her difficult days. As for me, I maintained my boundaries. I showed up for my assigned times, no more, no less. I declined last-minute requests to switch shifts unless I genuinely had the availability. I contributed to Maggie's care without sacrificing my own well-being. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the old guilt crept in, when Patricia's pointed remarks about real family values stung, when Jen's passive-aggressive comments made me question myself. But I held firm, reminding myself that setting healthy boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary. By the time Aunt Maggie was fully recovered and back to independence, something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. The change wasn't dramatic or complete, but it was real. Patricia would likely never fully accept my new boundaries, but she'd stopped trying to bulldoze them. Jen had actually apologized for forgetting to pick me up after my procedure last year. A small acknowledgement, but meaningful nonetheless. Uncle Pete and I had developed a genuine friendship, meeting for coffee every few weeks just to talk. Even Derek had changed, in his own way. He'd found a stable job and an apartment he could actually afford. When he texted me about a lease question, he added, "No rush, whenever you have time," without prompting. The most significant change, though, was within me. The constant weight of obligation had lifted. I no longer jumped at every text notification, no longer felt responsible for solving everyone else's problems. I had reclaimed my time, my energy, and my sense of self-worth. One evening, almost a year after that fateful late-night text from Derek, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark in Seattle. "How's life on the other side of the boundary line?" I smiled and typed back. "Peaceful, worth every difficult conversation." "Told you," he replied. "Coming out to visit this summer?" I realized I could say yes without calculating how many family emergencies might derail my plans. I could actually take a vacation without guilt. "Absolutely," I texted back, looking forward to it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I savored the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. My family relationships weren't perfect now. They probably never would be, but they were healthier, more balanced, more genuine. I had stopped being the family doormat, and in doing so had finally become the person my mother had raised me to be. someone who could love others without losing herself in the process. That, I realized, was the true meaning of family. Not endless sacrifice, not one-sided giving, but mutual respect and genuine care. It had taken 32 years and a lot of heartache to learn that lesson. But now that I had, I wasn't going back. I raised my glass to the darkening sky, a toast to my mother's memory and to my own hard-won wisdom. To setting boundaries, I whispered, and to the peace that follows.